Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Happy Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Sierra, and today I am joined by Genevieve Poppe. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I said it right, Poppy, right?
Yep, that's it. Poppy
Okay,
like the flower.
like the flower.
Yes.
Tell us about yourself.
A little bit about me. Well, one, I'm fun. You know this, but
I know,
I'm a fun hockey
I
date.
know.
Right. But
It's what's fun because we you've been in Utah for. I mean, this is your second time coming to Utah, and so
to hang out with you, yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
to be here at Weave
Yeah.
and we went to a hockey game last night,
Yes.
and you taught me everything about
Yeah.
hockey because I knew
I'm
nothing.
a longtime hockey mom, so that's I
Yeah,
guess important to know about me. But
yeah.
professionally, I've been in the dental space for a really long time. I've done everything from practice management and dental assisting to owning and managing some practices, and now I'm a consultant that works with dental practices all across the country.
And before we get into the meat of it, I just want to
Mhm.
zoom out. There's so many issues in dentistry, and this isn't just a dental podcast. Like a
Right.
lot of the people listening to this are dental, but they could be in eye care or a veterinary or other similar industries.
Sure.
Why do you stay in dental, and what do you love about dental?
I guess I feel like a lot of people who are in dental kind of, even when they try to leave it, kind of get sucked back into it. While I think a lot of us are caretakers and all of the practice verticals that, this podcast reaches, for me, dental is maybe kind of a weird place to reach people. It's a thing that not everybody loves to go do. Um, but you really can change people's lives with it. And I know that sounds hokey, but not just cosmetics, but restoring the way people feel about themselves. I personally grew up as a kid with really bad teeth. I had really low self esteem about the state of my teeth for a long time. And it wasn't just getting them straightened and making them look pretty that made me feel good, but it made me feel good once I knew that I had fully taken care of myself and overcome this personal piece that just always made me feel poor or less than or like I wasn't cared for, and so it was more than just the smile for me personally, and I know how that feels, and I'm still passionate about helping other people find that love for our industry.
And it's something that you carry with you every day in your life that's highly visible.
Yeah,
In my case, I had to get an implant recently,
yeah,
and I have a client through my job
right.
that is one of the best implant professionals in the world, and
Yeah.
so I was just gonna fly out and do it, but then I found somebody who was local, who
Mhm.
was, like, the highest rated person in the state,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Yeah, like, I wanna make that investment, like, this implant." I was 29 at the time, "This is gonna
Mhm.
be with me for the rest of my life,"
Right.
which will hopefully be a while, assuming I don't do anything too stupid. You know, assuming I don't,
Try not to ruin it, right.
right,
Yeah.
and so I was and just, like, the care with which this staff took
Mhm.
care of me and, put this implant in, the whole process from start to finish, seeing their practice was operating with, like, the latest and greatest technology,
Right.
and it was just, like, a really well-oiled machine.
Mhm.
I go for my annual checkup or not annual, I go for my regular cleaning a couple
Mhm.
months later, and they look at the X-rays and they say, "This implant's perfect. I mean, you couldn't have drawn a better one in a textbook," and I'm like, "That was what I was striving for."
Yeah.
And that gives me so much confidence knowing that, like, that's gonna be with me for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
and that they did such a good job with it. So, yeah, we could talk all day about, the what dentistry shifts and what healthcare shifts, but at the end of the day,
Mhm.
these industries exist to help people feel better, and that kinda brings us to what we're talking about today, which is implementing and operationalizing technology at the practice, which at the core sounds like not the most interesting and exciting thing,
Yeah.
but
Buckle
it's,
up, everybody.
I know, it's very but it's so core and so important
Mhm.
because there's so many, you're running oftentimes like a single location shop.
Right.
It could be your first time doing these things,
Mhm.
and it can be daunting because there's so many technologies that go, not just the clinical ones, but the business ones as well.
Right.
And as a consultant,
Mhm.
you've helped a lot of people implement many different technologies over the years,
Right.
correct?
Correct. Yeah. Some that don't even exist anymore.
Yeah. One
When I
thing comes
started
along.
assisting, we wheeled in intraoral cameras on a cart with a TV monitor, so, yeah, I've been around for a lot of dental technologies over the years, and, I think we can get into implementing, but going to your own story even, the thing that I think is really important is that we find the technologies that augment what really mattered to you about that experience, right? Like, you could have an office that has all the technology in the world, but what probably really made you feel good about the implant you got were the people around that technology, right? And you can look back at it and be like, "Oh, they had the best technology," but there are offices that present the best technology who don't produce people feeling like that about their result, and so a big piece of implementing it is making sure that your team's prepared to communicate around it, that the experience matches it, that the way we're utilizing it feels valuable and leaves that same type of impression on people.
100%. People aren't going to remember what you said, they're going to remember how you made them feel,
Mhm.
right? And at the end of the day, it's not only the tools that you have, but how you utilize them, right?
Totally.
And so that brings me to the first part of this conversation. Let's start with the broad landscape. Why is it important for practices to stay up to date on what's happening in technology? Because it is constantly changing.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many answers to this. Of course, there are some technologies that support new and evolving standards of care and making sure we're taking the best care of our patients and our clients in terms of what they deserve as patients. And there's some really cool things around that, not just in dentistry, but just all over the place. I just took my dogs to the vet. I was getting ready to, have sort of an end of life plan for a very old dog I have, and there's a new study that just came out, and a new drug and a new solution available to us that I didn't think we would have. So
Oh,
this isn't just dental. So there's, we have to keep up for what our patients and our clients deserve. But also, I think it's harder and harder to staff efficiently and effectively in so many different practice styles, and using technology wisely to augment some of the repetitive tasks and some of the things that don't necessarily require the high human touch so that we can stay available people wise for the patient experience as well.
well, and when you talk about that, like wheels to the road in actual practice, what are
hmm
some of the common barriers that you see to introducing new technology?
hmm
What are some ways you've seen people overcome them?
Yeah, well, I think the most common barrier is just human resistance to change, right? We don't like
Yeah.
to do something new. And I think at the core of that is that we don't like to feel inept at something, right? We don't like to start something that we don't feel good at. And that's the first step in anything new is sort of not being good at it before you're good at it. And so even while it doesn't always come out that way, why our teams and our offices are not wanting to do this new thing, I find at the human level, that's kind of what it is. It's that they don't want to take a task they do every day and that they feel good at and suddenly not feel good at it, right? Like, I know how to answer the phone. I've been doing it for 20 years, and now you hand me a new phone and I feel like I don't know how to use it. Like, that's a really uncomfortable feeling for people. And I think that's the first barrier in a lot of cases is just that people don't want to go through the discomfort of having to learn or implement something new where they won't feel confident. Of course, there's other barriers, which are just one more cost, one more product fatigue. Um, there's, you especially see that in dentistry where for a long time each solution was its own product. And now we have, these products that have multi solutions and we're able to do some consolidation of products. But even that represents change. And we're looking at old filters because I like the way this thing does this thing, and I like the way this thing does this thing. And there's no perfect solution that keeps us perfectly in our comfort zone, but also advances us into new, fresh, smart, budget-friendly technology.
I totally agree. Yeah, there's several different obstacles, and at the end of the day, it's you know taking that a little bit of a hit on
Mhm.
your time, or some, like, you're going to need to sacrifice a
Yeah.
little bit of time, a little bit of effort, a little bit of energy,
Mhm.
but the payoff for that is at the end of the day is serving the patients, right?
Yes.
Imagine if your vet hadn't looked up that particular study for the senior dog,
Right.
right? It's it really has real world implications, and a lot of patients actively seek out practices that are really investing and staying up to date on the latest and greatest.
Right. Well, our patients are busy. Our patients have ways they want to communicate. If we've not evolved to make things very easy for them, it's not going to be us anymore, no matter how much they like us, right? There's certain things you just really have to have now, I think, to stay competitive. You have to be able to schedule online. We can't expect every patient to call us between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., but also not on our lunch break, right? That's like an old thing that is not really a realistic expectation of current consumers, right? And cling to that and say, our patients value us enough to call us, and all of the excuses we make for ourselves. But let's just be real. Most of us like to do these things online. We want to do it when we have a minute. Most of us who are, you know, moms or the appointment maker of our household, we think of this at 7:30 p.m., this thing we've been meaning to do, right? And we don't want to call and leave a message and play phone tag. So there's just some basics that I think we really have to have in play in order to communicate with where people are now and what they expect in terms of consumer behaviors. Nobody wants to call you, we don't call JCPenney catalog anymore to order the sweater we like. We order it online. And we have to make ourselves easy to do business with to stay competitive for sure.
100%. Well, and on that note, if you're a practice that's looking for, that next thing, right, and
Mhm.
they're staying up to date, how can they make a decision and evaluate, I guess more succinctly, what are some of the criteria that they could utilize to evaluate what's going to be the right fit for our practice?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I encourage people to do when my doctors are asking me about a new product that maybe they like one shiny feature of is to actually assess what they currently have. A ton of owners that I talk to don't actually even know all of the things they subscribe to every month. They couldn't name them. And even when I ask for them to produce a list, it takes a minute, because they're not all paid monthly. Some are paid quarterly, some are prepaid, and it actually takes them a while to compile what tools they already have. I think that's a smart thing to assess before you pick a new product that may have replacement opportunity. Otherwise, you're just giving your team one more thing to sort of Frankenstein into the mix. So taking a moment to pause and being strategic about the solution you're implementing is smart. And if you need it, or it doesn't exist in something you already have. I recently shared with you a conversation I had about somebody who had weave who was looking for a certain solution. I'm like, you know that weave can do this, right? So, one, always consider that, but, two, I think you have to look at how it fits into the experience you're trying to create for people, right? So, is it just that this is like a cool tech clinical thing that we like to have, or is this part of how patients will communicate and interact with our office? If so, what customizations do we need to put on it so that it's not just stock, that it's reflective of a style of communication that we've utilized along the way? This is such a broad answer, but we can't just buy these tools and buy these technologies and keep stacking them into the office without consideration of communication to the users in our office, but also the receivers of that technology, which are our patients and our customers.
Well, that leads perfectly into my next question, which is,
Okay.
you select a piece of technology, you find
Yeah.
the thing that like it does something you need it to do, you've made that decision.
Yeah.
What are the steps that a practice needs to take to make sure that it launches successfully and actually gets implemented?
Yeah. Take a minute, right? I know we get excited and we want to just get these things up and running, but I think that's part of the pushback that we get at the team and user level sometimes is that like one person decides on it and they set it up over a weekend and suddenly people show up and here's this thing that they half know how to use. So, you might be able to get by with that in a small office, right? People won't love you for it, but you can probably pull it off. If you have a bigger team or multi locations, you have to have an actual implementation plan, which isn't just the physical setup of a product, which is where I think a lot of people's implementation plans begin and end, which is just getting these phones installed or just getting this new software updated. It has to be, where is the time for training? What does our actual training path look like? How will I know that people are trained and successful in using it? Like, as the manager and implementer, how am I going to measure that this is working well? And have all of those questions answered before you just come in on a Friday and get this whole thing landed. You'll have a much less resistant path, and you'll know that you'll have a way to measure that you were actually successful with it as well.
And looking at your practices that you've worked with as a
Mhm.
consultant and the ones that you've worked in and owned,
Yeah.
how can a practice then, they've selected technology, they've implemented it successfully.
Mhm.
How can they make sure that it actually gets operationalized and implemented into the daily routines?
Yeah. Oh, well, one is defining what that means for you, right? Like a good example of this would be like a scanner. Like a lot of dental offices will buy a scanner, for instance. This is a clinical piece of
Yeah.
equipment, right? And they'll do like a half day training for everybody on a Friday. And cool, now they have it. And their hope is that just like magically hygienists will, incorporate this into their new patient exams, or we'll tell them a couple times, we'd like you to do this with new patients, right? But they've taken one scan on a teammate on a half Friday And then we've kind of asked them to do it, and then it never goes anywhere from there. We're not utilizing it to its fullest. So make clear the expectation. This is part of our new patient exam. This is what that means. Here's how that exam looks. And when you walk in as the doctor and you don't have that scan, you have to say, "Oh, I'll be right back when that scan's ready." You have to actually hold people accountable to the implementation, and that's a whole nother podcast, but accountability is not not an easy thing for a lot of dental managers. And so as a result, we don't a lot of times get the full benefit of sometimes big investments that we've made. Another way to do that is to sort of measure or count them, right? Find a report on it so that you don't have to micromanage or babysit it. But every time we take a scan on a patient, we enter a code, and I can run that report by provider every week or every month to make sure that they're doing it. And then when I approach that teammate that may be doing it well or not doing it at all, I have actual evidence instead of a "I feel like you're not doing it" conversation.
Well, on that note, what are some of the metrics or procedures that people could put in place to make sure that that's actually happening and,
Mhm.
have that accountability motion?
Right. Well, it depends a little bit on the technology, right? So if it's something clinical, you can create a procedure code or a dummy code that's very easy to post with each time it's done. You can run reports on it, you can measure it, you can set the goal for what you want them to do and compare where you've missed that. If it's something more like communication, I think a lot of people don't look at that as closely as they could. There's a lot of data there that's never really utilized, like understanding your missed calls or understanding how responsive we are to these text backs. Like we have the automation, but did it engage in a conversation? Let's look at where the ball is being dropped and actually build those moments and then set a goal to reduce missed opportunities and actually track and follow it and train people up around it.
100%. So as we come to the end of the podcast here, my last question is for somebody who's out there listening to this,
Right.
they're either in the process of implementing technology or they will have to implement new technology at some point. That's just the nature of the game.
Yes.
What would be your top three pieces of advice for them to make sure that their technology is successful and that their practice is really, a tech forward, innovative, high functioning practice?
Sure. Yeah. My first piece of advice would be clarity, right? So be clear about what you're looking to accomplish with this new technology and communicate that clearly to your team. Like we're implementing this for this reason and this is our expectation around it, right? The goal shouldn't just be buying it and getting it set up. So we have to be clear about the actual end game or the purpose of it. The second would be predetermine your measures of success and find a way to follow that, track that, and show early repetition and accountability. If you don't follow through with expectations around it early in implementation, it's a losing battle to come back later and be like, "I'm really disappointed in you guys for not, being as excited as I am about this thing and not doing it," right? So in addition to that clarity of expectation. So what is the expectation? How will you keep track of that? How will you keep eyes on it? And how will you drive the repetition you need to get that result? And I guess the third is sort of the end game of that, which is accountability. Don't be afraid to provide that clarity as clear as it needs to be and that repetition as often as it needs to be to drive the end result that we started out with, right? We're nice people in a lot of caretaking practices, so this isn't just dentistry. We're high empathy, conflict averse people, which tends to mean we're not great at holding our teams accountable. But that's to me always so unfortunate when we make an investment that can make things better for our practice and our patients, but we're missing that result because we didn't follow through as the leaders and the implementers to hold people accountable to the expectation.
Well, I think you said it perfectly, and I learned a ton from everything you say. As always, every time we meet, I'm just like, okay, yeah, wow, that's you should write a book or something.
Okay, maybe I'll work on it.
Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone who listened and watched and otherwise participated. And until next time, stay happy. Take care.